Great vibe in the room on such a wonderful occasion. Hello everybody, my name's Adam Mooney. I'm the Director of the National Centre for Reconciliation Practice here at Swinburne. Been in the role for just over a year and absolutely loving and thriving in the environment that Swinburne has created in relation to reconciliation. As we approach the end of autumn, we celebrate the wonderful weather that we've had over the last few days and few weeks, and really appreciate being in Hawthorn and on this wonderful campus to celebrate that. So this is a warm welcome to Swinburne's Annual Reconciliation Lecture for 2024. All of our efforts in reconciliation are welcome now more than ever. That's the National Reconciliation Week theme right across the country. And we'll hear from our wonderful speaker, Mr. Fred Chaney AO, about that. And we'll also hear from our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Pascal Kester, about the work that we're doing here at Swinburne and positioning reconciliation. But first, I'd like to ask Uncle Colin Hunter Jr., Wurundjeri Elder, to speak to open this event. Please welcome Uncle Colin.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I want to start by acknowledging that this evening we are meeting on the lands of my ancestors, the Wurundjeri people. And I want to take this opportunity to pay my respects to my elders, both past, present and emerging, elders from all nations. But I particularly want to pay my respects to everyone gathered here this evening. But I want to make a couple of special acknowledgements. I want to acknowledge our guest speaker, Fred, and Angela, his lovely wife, Angela. I want to acknowledge and pay my deepest respects to you both. I want to acknowledge you, Pascal, yourself, John, and the rest of the Swinburne team. I want to acknowledge and pay my respects to them. Wominjeka, welcome. Wurundjeri Balik, Yumin Kondi Bik. The Wurundjeri people welcome everyone to land today. Wurundjeri no, Budambor War, Kondi Ningnak, Dubudam Bik, Bolik Bor Tiligan. The Wurundjeri people want to look after and protect the land as they did long before. Wurundjeri country extends from the inner city of Melbourne. It goes across the mountains of the Great Dividing Range, west to the Werribee River, south to the Mordialloc Creek and east to Mount Borbor. And the Wurundjeri people are part of the Kulin Nation and of the Warrong language group. Hello, my name is Colin Hunter Jr. or Willert, meaning possum, a name given to me by my grandmother as a young boy. I'm a proud and passionate 7th generation Wurundjeri man and a direct descendant of Bibijan, who was Ngullungeta, or head of the tribe at time at first settlement. And it's through my grandmother, Gumbriar, meaning white dove, or Auntie Tiny or Nanish, who was known to all us mob, that I got Aboriginal culture and heritage in my life today, so for that I say thanks, Nan. My grandmother was one of the last of the Aboriginal people born in the early 1920s up at Coronach Mission in Healesville, before she got pushed up to Barham on the river in New South Wales. In Aboriginal culture, a great deal of respect is given to the land, the plants and animals alike. And I'll leave my gum leaves up the back of the room somewhere. And if you get an opportunity as you move around tonight, see if you can get a nice one and put in your pocket for the night, please. The certificates that will keep you safe on country and give you the access to the resources while you're on country. And while you're on Orange country, you're most welcome to the traditional lands on the waterways of the Wurundjeri people. So Wominjeka, welcome. Look, it was a bit of a remiss of me. I didn't acknowledge the mob here, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I want to acknowledge and pay my deepest respects to you all individually and your families. So yeah. Look, I'll apologise because I've had a huge couple of weeks and I've still got a couple of huge days to go. So I'm going to ask for the transcript of this because I'm really interested here. I've heard Fred speak before, but as he said to me, I'll thank myself on Fred's behalf. Because I have to go. But no, all jokes aside, I'm disappointed I can't hear it, but I will be listening to it, Fred, so I'll enjoy that. But enjoy the evening, and Yanni, get what you put in, so listen, please. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Uncle Colin. And for people that haven't seen Uncle Colin's schedule, he's a very busy person and in such a warm way creates a sense of belonging for us all right across Wurundjeri country. So Uncle Colin was here on Thursday at our Sorry Day event, and was at the MCG doing the welcome at the Dreamtime at the G. And thank you so much, Uncle Colin, for your warm welcome. And I also acknowledge that we're on the ancestral lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I particularly pay respect to my wonderful, courageous, inspiring First Nations colleagues from the Mundani Tumbadul Centre, led by Professor John Evans, our Pro-Vice-Chancellor, for Indigenous engagement, and delighted to spend and lucky to work alongside those people. Tonight, we will shortly hear from our Vice-Chancellor and President, Professor Pascal Kester, as well, and of course, Fred Chaney. And then John Evans will provide an acknowledgement and thanks to Fred. So we'll hear from those three speakers. This year's National Reconciliation Week theme, as I mentioned earlier, is now more than ever. And it was decided following a Reconciliation Australia group of RAP leaders that attended a forum in Sydney in March during the aftermath of the Voice referendum in October last year. It was disappointing to so many of us, and so as a reconciliation community across Australia, we ask ourselves where to from here, and that will continue to be a question that we ask, but I think we'll hear some answers and get some inspiration tonight. After that day in October, it was reassuring and inspiring for me and for many of our students, staff and colleagues to arrive on campus on Monday morning, and the first thing in our email inboxes was an email from the Vice-Chancellor and from Pascal and from John expressing and acknowledging the profound disappointment of the outcome and committing to redouble our work at Swinburne University and particularly our efforts in relation to reconciliation. For our whole university community, that means so much to me personally, but also to all of our students, particularly our First Nations students and staff, and as well as all staff. I haven't had the opportunity, but to publicly thank and pay my great thanks to Pascal and John for their resilience, their leadership, and their own modelling of reconciliation. Now I'd like to introduce Pascal Kester, our Vice-Chancellor. Before joining Swinburne in August 2020, Professor Kester was Deputy Vice-Chancellor and President Academic at the University of Adelaide from 2011 to 2020. In 2012, Professor Kester was awarded the Chevalier de l'Ordre National du Mérite, which is the National Order of Merit, and no, my French is not what it should be, which is one of France's highest honours in recognition of her contribution to higher education in both France and in Australia. In 2009, she was elected Distinguished Fellow of the Australian and New Zealand Marketing Academy. In 2007, she also received France's highest academic recognition, becoming Professeur d'Université. Pascal's leadership in reconciliation at Swinburne has been significant, pushing us to move from safe to brave. This was way before anyone else started to talk about moving from safe to brave. Pascal was imploring all of us to do that. Our first priority at Swinburne is to make Swinburne a welcoming and culturally safe environment for all students and staff, especially for First Nations people. There is major energy and investments. Pascal has been, with John, have been leading the development of a new reconciliation action plan that we will be launching in early 2025. For those of you that are on campus or familiar with Swinburne, the fabulous new Indigenous learning circles at all three campuses are an outstanding contribution of showing the physical and spiritual connection at the same time to Wurundjeri country and to the Kulin Nation. For that, I say to you, Pascal, thank you very much. Would you please welcome Professor Pascal Kester.
Well, thank you very much, Adam, for those kind words. Good evening, everyone. And I want to thank Uncle Colin, even though he has left the premises, but a big thank you for the way that he always welcomes us to country. It's very special whenever he welcomes us to country. It's particularly special when he addresses the graduates at our graduation ceremonies, and that connection is always such an important part of the message that we want to deliver. I would also like to start by acknowledging that we meet tonight on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, a fact that we acknowledge regularly, but which we also have embodied in our campus by the creation of those learning circles. And if anything was more symbolic, I suppose, of the fact that we were going to take the referendum and move forward, was the fact that the week after the result of the referendum, those learning circles stood and started to kind of really capture the imagination of our staff as a place for people to connect to that reality of the fact that we are on the land where the Wurundjeri people have been learning and teaching for thousands of years. A very important reminder as we look to the future. I would like to pay my respect to elders past and present, and also to all Aboriginal people who are with us tonight, including our very courageous staff from the First Nation group that is the Mundani Tumbadul Centre. I'm really proud of the fabulous work that we are doing here at Swinburne under the leadership of John Evans, Professor John Evans, a proud Wiradjuri man, and our Pro-Vice Chancellor, Indigenous engagement, something that was part of our previous RAP, and a great affirmation that leadership needs to come from Indigenous people, for Indigenous people, and the rest of us too. So I think that's also a great recognition. It is my great privilege to be able to welcome you tonight. And I've got to tell you, this is the most oversubscribed event in our calendar. Full stop. We had to have chairs, and we had to make sure that everybody could come, because everybody was wanting to kind of be part of that annual reconciliation lecture, which is now becoming very much part of our tradition. And I'm very delighted to be able to welcome Mr. Fred Chaney AO for tonight's event, along with his wife. And we're very privileged to be able to hear his message, because he was the foundation co-chair of Reconciliation Australia. It all started with a few people who were willing to lead the way. And it is now getting us not by a long way, we're not where we need to be, but we are walking in that direction. And it is because of trailblazers like our speaker tonight. So we're superbly pleased to be able to welcome him. I also want to acknowledge a number of people who are with us tonight, although I see that Sue Ann Hunter, Deputy Chair and Commissioner of Yarrug Justice Commission, is possibly running a little bit late, but we have with us our Chancellor, Professor John Pollers, OAM. We have a number of council members who are with us tonight, and Dr. Leonie Walsh, and I think Ray Johnson is here as well. And of course, we are particularly lucky to also have our previous Vice Chancellor, Linda Christensen AO, and Joe coming with us tonight, as well as members of the executive team. And of course, many visitors whom I hope will see this room and this institution as a place where they belong and where the important questions of the day are being debated. Swinburne is strongly committed to driving reconciliation and working with Indigenous communities to create positive impact. And in fact, this annual reconciliation lecture is part, like the appointment of Professor Evans and like the Learning Circle, it is very much part of our Reconciliation Action Plan, what we call the RAP. And I think we can be proud of being leaders in relation to how we have embraced reconciliation. We were indeed the first university to achieve the status of Elevate RAP in 2017, and we remain the only university to this day and one of only 13 organizations nationally to have that level of leadership recognition. In 2019, we joined the other 12 Elevate RAP organization to support very publicly the Uluru Statement from the Heart and to call for truth, for treaty and voice. That commitment remains steadfast, and it remained steadfast throughout the somewhat difficult conversation prior to the referendum and the aftermath that Adam has described so eloquently before. In 2022, we launched the National Centre for Reconciliation Practice. And I will emphasize that practice is actually what we are most proud of. There are lots of people who talk about reconciliation. We make it happen. And we make it happen so that it makes a real difference in the lives of people. And I think this is a very Swinburne thing, praxis as well as theory. And this is something we're very proud. So we aim to advance the connection between the national industry, the community, the academic knowledge, to support reconciliation so that it becomes real and not just a topic of conversation. We explore the opportunities and the challenges that relate to this reconciliation journey, noting that as we progress, it seems that the end is always even further, and there probably is no end to the process by which we can achieve reconciliation. But the programs of the center are taking shape, and they are really shaping up nicely under the leadership of Adam, who has actually been with us for a year, but has already made a really big impact. It enables us to play to our strength. For instance, we've established an Indigenous building co-fabrication center where we focus on local self-determined home design. We're very good at that. Design and architecture is one of our forte. And also construction that uses innovative community-based and community-led technology and construction techniques. We're also working to establish the Mundanin Tumbadu Vocational Center of Excellence to enable the career activation and acceleration of First Nation students, and an Indigenous Innovation and Enterprise Hub, because deep down we really think that innovation and enterprise is something that would actually get everybody ahead, including Indigenous people, of course. Now, the center provides professional advisory services to industry, which include giving advice to RAP organizations, as well as emerging partnership with Reconciliation Australia. And it also engages with a lot of people who are working in a myriad of small and medium-sized businesses who want to reconciliate but don't quite know what it looks like in the case of their organization. So we want to partner with them to assist them in their journey. We're also deepening and broadening our own actions around the university through what we call Indigenous Business Action Plan, IBAPs. Acronyms are us, right? Which are always self-led by the different schools and divisions, but also always supported by the Mundanin Tumbadu Center. And through the center and through our 2020 to 2024 RAP, Swinburne continues to be committed to advancing reconciliation by embedding self-determination, cultural safety, and Indigenous knowledges right across the university. And in our upcoming RAP, which will be 25 to 27, we will focus specifically on actions that will enable a deep sense of hope and belonging to all Australians within our sphere of influence. We are building on our legacy with these new practical programs and actions to advance key aspects identified as crucial in this new era of post-referendum reconciliation, specifically truth-telling, anti-racism, and self-determination of voice. In 2023, we saw a 30% increase in the number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander higher ed and vocational students enrolled at Swinburne. And I think Swinburne's superpower is the fact that we are a dual sector university. We can open the gate wide so people can actually enter the world of higher education with confidence, and then we can scaffold around each learner what it is that they need to go one step further. We want to continue on this and more broadly improve the cultural citizenship of all of our staff and students so that they can understand Indigenous perspectives around the world. Earlier this year, we were delighted, as Adam noted, to open, with the help of Uncle Colin, actually, our Indigenous learning circles, not just here on our Hawthorne campus, but also at Mount Turner and Croydon. And it was fantastic to see that we had staff, we had guests, we had students, all of them wanting to partake in that recognition, this physical recognition that we are on land where people have been learning and teaching for thousands of years. Those are spaces who are designed to inspire, I guess, people's reflection, but also to just provide a natural place for gathering and for exchange of ideas. And as well as being part and a key part of our next-gen campus revitalization, those learning circles are the embodiment also of our of our need to be part of the community, so that the community around Hawthorne, around Croydon, around Wantona will actually have a place that they also identify as a place where they can reconciliate and understand more that national debate. This year's theme for national reconciliation is now more than ever, because now more than ever, we need to tackle this unfinished business of reconciliation. Despite, or perhaps because of the outcome of the referendum, the Voice to Parliament referendum, our commitment needs to be unwavering. This referendum outcome has not changed one iota our commitment to deliver on our RAP, and it certainly hasn't changed the resolve of our staff and students in relation to their engagement with Swinburne. It has not undone the work of the Mundani Tumbadu Centre to advocate for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in teaching and learning, research, staff, culture, and governance. Now more than ever, we need reconciliation, and the outcome of the referendum energizes us to double down on our commitment to closing the gap. I'm very proud to lead a university that is dedicated to advancing reconciliation by embedding self-determination, cultural safety, and Indigenous knowledges across the university and advocating for this loudly and proudly. Reconciliation is a collective responsibility, and it creates lasting positive impact on us all. I'm very grateful to be working on meaningful actions for our Swinburne community. And as we listen to Fred delivering tonight's keynote address, I encourage you to think about just what more we can do individually, each of us, and together to embed reconciliation in our lives. Fred, welcome to the stage.
Thank you so much, Pascal. So Fred's going to speak to us very shortly for 30 to 40 minutes. Then we'll have 10, 15 minutes for questions as well. So we can look forward to that. Fred particularly likes the interactive conversations around reconciliation. So please think about some questions as Fred's speaking. So Fred Chaney's hard work in support of often marginalised people has never faltered. As founding co-chair of Reconciliation Australia and an early advocate for Aboriginal voting rights, Fred's contribution includes establishing the Aboriginal Legal Service of Western Australia between 1978 and 80, was the Federal Minister for Aboriginal Affairs. For many years, Fred was the Deputy President of the National Native Title Tribunal, and more recently was Chair of Desert Knowledge Australia. He also chaired the board of the Central Desert Native Title Services. He was instrumental in establishing the Graham Polly Farmer Foundation, for those of you unaware, a fabulous footballer and now a wonderful foundation, which supports Indigenous young people to reach their potential. Fred's long history of public service is rooted in his fierce commitment to social justice and belief in the inherent equality of all people. In his leadership roles, Fred inspires others to work collaboratively, respectfully, and ambitiously to overcome the barriers that inhibits people's full economic and social participation in Australian society. Fred was appointed an Officer of the Order of Australia, AO, in 1997, and in 2014 was recognised by the Prime Minister as Senior Australian of the Year. And at a personal level, from my perspective, throughout his whole life, Fred has welcomed and mentored many non-Aboriginal people in reconciliation concepts and behaviours, especially the vast alumni at Reconciliation Australia and the broader RAP community members, and myself included. Please join me in welcoming Fred Chaney.
Well, they say you should never appear on a platform with children or with animals. I don't intend to appear on any platform after the Vice-Chancellor ever again. No, there was no imputation to an animal, Vice-Chancellor. Just you're bloody good. I must congratulate you too on Uncle Colin, because he's quick on the uptake. Well, before he left, I said to him, he told me he was leaving, and I said, look, of course I'm going to have to thank you for the welcome to country, but you won't be here to hear it. He said, no. And I said, well, that's often the case. Would you mind saying, as part of your welcome to the country, I acknowledge that Fred's thanking me. And so I just think that was quite quick on his part, and good on him. But I do thank him for the welcome to country, and I acknowledge the Rotary people and other Aboriginal people who are present. I'm not very good at some of those formalities, but I like to think that the work I've done with Aboriginal people over the last 65 years does indicate my respect and affection for you and my belief that working with you is important. I don't intend to talk about Swinburne University. That would be like teaching your grandmother to suck eggs. The fact of the matter is we've had a wonderful exposition from the Vice-Chancellor of the breadth and depth of the work that Swinburne is doing. So I do acknowledge that and thank you for it. The Vice-Chancellor put emphasis on the idea of actually action, and I couldn't agree more. I went to a reconciliation breakfast in Perth on Monday, and they had those little forms. What are you going to do for reconciliation? I wrote in the back of mine, just get on with it. And I think that was very much the spirit of your address, Vice-Chancellor, and I thank you for that. And I should acknowledge the Chancellor. I was a Chancellor once. Chancellors are in the most terrible position, really not much power, and you're totally dependent on the quality of your Vice-Chancellor. And so, and of course, in maintaining good governance in the institution, but I do acknowledge you, Chancellor. I found it the most difficult task I ever had to undertake. I've explained to the Vice-Chancellor why it was so difficult, but I won't say that publicly. But I do congratulate you on the very holistic way that you've approached this, in a very practical way that you are trying to make a difference. Angela is here with me, and she has been with me for the whole of the 65 years that I've been involved with Aboriginal matters. And she's been a very valuable advisor. And one bit of advice was, she said, you're hopeless reading a speech. You know, well, she's right, I am hopeless, so I'm winging it. And I'm hopeless at having an ordered set of thoughts, so this could be a pretty disastrous evening for you all. But I hope you'll be patient. What I want to leave you with? Well, I do want to leave you with a couple of things. One is that we have and will continue to make real progress. One of the few advantages of being old, and there are almost no advantages of being old, but one of the few is that it does give you a long view. And Australia in 2024 is a foreign country from the country that I first experienced Aboriginal people in 1959. I will touch on some of the enormous changes that have taken place. And I do get great satisfaction from the fact that we have as a nation made progress. We are a better country than we were. But I also acknowledge that there's a hell of a lot still to be done, and I'll talk about that too. But the second thing that I hope I'll leave you with is that the biggest gap that remains to be closed is the gap between government intentions and the way government actually acts. I think this is the major barrier to our closing the gap, closing the many gaps, and I want to explain that in some detail. I also want to talk a bit about context and perspective. My perspective is a perspective of an old person who's been around for a long time, and that has advantages and disadvantages. But one of the disadvantages is that I'm no longer at the cutting edge of energy and imagination. That comes from the young. Again, I note the Vice-Chancellor's comments about the engagement of the student body. We were at our best as 17-year-olds Gee, she was at her best as a 17-year-old, I can tell you. Oh, she was gorgeous. But we saw problems, we've got to do something about it. And can you imagine the University Liberal Club of Western Australia going out to an Aboriginal fringe camp at Alloa Grove and erecting playground furniture? I mean, that's the sort of silly thing you do when you're young, where you think, how do I make a difference? But can you imagine, actually, a Liberal Party branch doing that anyway? I mean, I was a member of the Liberal Party for many, many years and represented it in Parliament for very many years. And at that time, I looked to the Liberal Party of Victoria as my beacon, really. And I just want to say that I've been really sad that I think the idealism that drove the party at that time, and which I was a beneficiary of, has been much harder to find of recent years. I'm now non-political, except to the extent that I strongly support my niece Kate as an independent member for Curtin, where I'm proud to say we had 700 volunteers working on the referendum, and we got a majority. And I think if we'd had the same level of community effort and engagement across Australia, the results might have been somewhat better. But the other thing I want to say about context, and I suppose part of what I want to say tonight, is a plea to never have an enemy in reconciliation. I don't like the thought of my country being divided into camps of people who can't talk to each other, who cannot discuss, who can't understand different points of view. I think that is a really bad situation for the country generally, and I don't think we'll handle our economic problems, our various problems, our immigration problems, our all sorts of problems, our tax problems, if we can't have sensible conversations across different viewpoints. And reconciliation is a lot of different things. Reconciliation for me, I'm not really interested in too many of the technicalities, but I think from my very earliest years, it has really meant two things. The first thing is the intolerable difference in circumstance of so many Aboriginal people. I find that offensive, intolerable. I didn't like it when I was 17, I don't like it now. And so one essential deep stream of reconciliation is doing something about the gaps. That's not assimilationist, that is just a matter of fairness and decency, of the fair go and all of those other things. The context, though, of people's, the context in which people form their views are so different. And I want to reflect on just my last week as an indication of how different viewpoints can be. Last week I had the privilege of going out to an area called the Nullanjara Lands. They're the communities which are to the west of the Northern Territory South Australian border in Western Australia. They are the most remote communities you can imagine. They're hard to get to. They are often badly serviced. Life expectancy, I'm told, is 43. I've been visiting that area since I was minister in 1979, and I've kept contact since, and I have close contact with them now. And I spent a day in Warburton with officers of the agency, the Indigenous Affairs Agency, the government really, talking about the replacement of CDP, the employment program. And the relevance of that to context is that from the point of view of the people of the lands, the gap between the way the government says it wants to operate and the way the government does operate is huge. Now, I'm not having a go at public servants here. I love public servants. I particularly love an ex-public servant called Bill Gray, whose sister is here today. He was my principal advisor on land in 1978 to 1980 and has remained a close friend and workmate ever since. But the point is that the people on the lands know what the Prime Minister and the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs say. And I brought some of those quotes, which if I was a tidier speaker, I'd probably be able to come. Oh, here's one. What does the Prime Minister say? If we want to close the gap, we have to listen to people who live on the other side of it. Canberra must be willing to share power with communities, to offer responsibility and ownership and self-determination, to let local knowledge design programs, to trust locals to deliver them, and to listen to the locals for them to tell us what's working and what isn't. That's a culture change we have to drive in this building, in the public service, and across governments at all levels. The price of failure over successive governments isn't just counted in dollars, it's measured in lives. Amen. Amen, Prime Minister. I agree with every word. But it's not like that when you're actually negotiating. Governments are not actually structured to work like that, and I'll come back to that theme in some more detail. The next day at Warburton, we had a difficult community meeting, difficult because people raised difficult issues. And then we went out to a creek and we went with the elders, the really old people, notwithstanding life expectancy being 43. There are a lot of old people. The trouble is a lot of people die young. And they talked about the songlines of the creek, and they talked about the days of the mission, because Warburton was originally a mission. They talked about their lived experience and memories. And for them, the things that we worry about and talk about, pretty meaningless actually. Their agenda is their agenda. And I'm really pleased to hear their agenda. And the important thing is to have ears and to try to act on it. So that was part of my last week. I came back to Perth and we went to a reconciliation breakfast. Reconciliation is powering along in Western Australia. We may be a backward state. We may have had the smallest yes vote. We may have only voted 85% in 1967. And we may have been the most bitter opponents of land rights. But I tell you what, in Western Australia, we are the land rights, we are the native title capital of Australia. A huge amount of Western Australia is under native title, and it has changed the balance of power in Western Australia. And I'm really enjoying it, I can tell you. So that was a wonderful breakfast. Over 1,000 people turned up, and it was live screened to right around the state, to lots of corporations, to lots of communities. It was the sort of thing that, it was a reminder of just how living this movement is. In the afternoon, but the context there was very much the context of the sort of things that what should reconciliation be doing. In the afternoon, I went to the Polly Farmer Foundation, which has been mentioned. We set the Polly Farmer Foundation up in 1995. Polly said, I see a lot of good jobs in this country, but I don't see many Aboriginal people in those jobs. And he made it a condition of Stephen Hawke, writing an authorised biography, that Stephen Hawke had to set up a foundation to assist young Aboriginal people to succeed. Polly's daughter, Kim, expressed all this at the opening of a building that they now own in Western Australia, when she said, well, Steve Hawke copied my father because he handballed that job to Fred. And he did. And I, in turn, did a bit of a flick pass to a ex-Labor MP. And as Kim put it, and that bloke, who's a big bloke, knocked it down to John Cunningham, and the three of us got this foundation up off the ground. And they were celebrating the fact that they've got 2,700 students in government schools who they're assisting through to year 12. And it's a lovely story of 30 years of continuous, constant effort. And their focus is education as the answer. And that's their context and their perspective. And my perspective as an old guy is that, as I said before, Australia is a much better place and really a foreign country. The Australia I found in the bush in 1959, 58, 59, was a segregated society where Aboriginal people were treated with contempt. At best they were ignored, but when not ignored they were treated with contempt. Where there was complete segregation in a social and economic sense, where Aboriginal women were abused in ways that I found totally shameful. And I went back to university and I quickly understood that these people didn't have the vote, they weren't counted in the census, they were, in a legal sense, as well as a social and economic sense, segregated. And that's why I feel pretty happy about things, looking at that Australia then and Australia now. Because what happened was that in 1961 we got voting rights. And again, this is a question of getting on with it. The University Liberal Club, we wrote the submission to the Parliamentary Committee on Voting Rights. This should happen, and it did happen. Didn't happen in the 67 referendum, as so many people happened in 1961-62 when the Commonwealth legislated for that change. Then we had the magic of the referendum in 1967. Now that referendum is really interesting because the technical change of the Constitution are not much, but it's actually a helpful thing to think about the referendum because it explains the difference between that referendum and this one. The 1967 referendum was really about equality. It was about admitting Aboriginal people to full citizenship. That wasn't the legal impact of the thing, but that's what the campaign was about. And Jackie Huggins, who was one of the distinguished deliverers of this lecture, whenever she speaks without notes, because she's talking, she talks about equality. Equality really matters. And equality is something we as Australians like to think we believe in. We think we're an egalitarian people. Well, I don't think we're all that egalitarian, actually, but that's a self-belief. And what happened not long after 1967 was that land rights came along. Now, land rights is something that only Aboriginal people can have. And land rights excited the most amazing negative passions. We got it through federally for reasons which I don't have time to expand on, but that happened with all party support, land rights in the Northern Territory. But the attempts to get land rights in places like Queensland and Western Australia were greeted with the most powerful opposition, the most powerful and often racist opposition. And it was very uncomfortable. I can tell you that as Minister for Aboriginal Affairs in 1979 and in 1980, my state conference, the state conference of my party, voted me down 200 to 10 votes because they were so bitterly opposed to land rights. I can tell you that's a very uncomfortable position for politicians because they actually hold your future in their hands. But that was the depth of feeling, and it's important to remember that when the Labor Party promised national land rights under Hawke, what happened? There was huge public opposition, and the Hawke government and the Burke Labor government in Western Australia collapsed in the face of that opposition. And they withdrew the land rights propositions just as they did not proceed with the treaty propositions. In other words, there was a totally different public response to the notion of Aboriginal difference. Now that is what I think made this last referendum so difficult, and which Jacinta Price capitalised on brilliantly. This was saying we are putting in the Constitution permanent difference, and a lot of people didn't want to buy that. Yes, you can say there were racists who opposed it, but I knew really good pro-Aboriginal people that didn't want to vote yes because they didn't want to see that permanent difference in the Constitution. The notion of equality is something that has worked really well for reconciliation at times, but it didn't work for the referendum that we've just lost. And when you think about it, why did we in the 1960s set about setting Aboriginal legal services and Aboriginal medical services and all of the other things that we were doing. We did that because we wanted equality. That was what drove Aboriginal participation and our participation. So I guess what I'm trying to make is we need to understand that the fact that someone voted no doesn't mean they're the enemy. It doesn't mean that they're racist. They may be racist, but it doesn't necessarily follow. The fact of the matter is there are legitimate reasons that need to be argued. Why do I, as someone who believes in equality, who believes that my primary status is a citizen of this country, an equal citizen of this country, why do I support Aboriginal difference? Well, it's quite simple. I support Aboriginal difference because it's real. It's the reality that we have and that we share with the United States, with Canada, with New Zealand, and with the Scandinavian countries. The continuing existence of Aboriginal collective identities, whatever we have done. And we've done everything possible at times to get rid of those identities. In my state of Western Australia, the protector of Aboriginals, notorious now, promoted the separation of Aboriginal children, and it was to destroy the people culturally as a collective. If an Aboriginal person wanted to be a citizen, they had to deny their families and their language. They could not use their language or associate with their families. We did everything possible, and a Canadian judge summed it up for me. He said, a judge called Berger, who did a lot of work on native Canadian cases, he said, we've tried everything. We've tried extermination, we've tried assimilation, we've tried integration, and through all this, the native people have endured. That phrase sticks with me. When I think of what we've tried to do with the Noongar people in the southwest and Western Australia, we did everything possible to destroy their identity, and we failed. And the Noongar people, despite total dispossession, dispersal, being put into camps, their children removed, were able to prove in the federal court sufficient connection to country to get a native title settlement across the whole of the southwest. So it is now written into Western Australian law that the Noongars are the people of the southwest. They have rights to land, they have rights, a whole lot of rights, and they are all vested in organisations which represent their traditional nations within the Noongar cultural bloc. So it's a complicated story. And it really does, to me, mean that you just keep plugging away and eventually you get there. Looking at what's happened over this period, the Racial Discrimination Act, land rights, the apology, the Stolen Children Report, the Native Title Act of 1993, the Keating-Redfern speech, a whole lot of things have transformed this country, but the most important transformation has been the Mabo case. The Mabo case to me is the biggest thing, the most important thing that's happened since 1788. And I say that because until Mabo, everything that the Aboriginal people asked for, they had to ask for as a favour from government. Will you please acknowledge us? Will you please recognise us? Will you please? Well, what the High Court did in Mabo was to say, no, these people have rights coming from their law and culture. It is there not because of what the Parliament says, but because it's there. The common law recognises it. And the great difference in Australia now is that Aboriginal people come to the table not as supplicants, but as stakeholders. Now, it's very imperfect. John mentioned to me some of the discord that there is among Aboriginal groups about native title. But I can tell you it has transformed the way that governments and corporations in particular have had to deal with Aboriginal people. I dealt with the mining industry as a Minister for Aboriginal Affairs and generally as a supporter of Aboriginal people, and the mining industry was contemptuous of Aboriginal interests. It regarded this as something to be cleared away without regard, almost universally, if not universally. And in 1993, I think it was, 1995, the leaders of Rio Tinto said, hang on, we can't do this anymore because these people are stakeholders. And they led a change which has been imperfect, as we've seen recently at Juukan Gorge, but a change which has been utterly different in that Aboriginal people come to the table as stakeholders. People I work with at Warburton have got 3 levels of protection now. They've got native title, they've got leases, and they've got land rights. So what I'm saying is that that is the sort of transformation that makes me think that Australia is a better place. Now, does that mean as an old guy with this my perspective, I think Australia's fine? No, I don't. I mean, why would I bother to continue working if I thought everything was fine? But the things I find most worrying are things that I find very difficult to deal with. From my perspective, the worst things that are happening, and I talk about my state, are the high levels of child removal, the high levels of imprisonment of children and of adults, the continuing gap in life expectancy, and the other continuing gaps in social and economic circumstance. But the most critical things are things which go to the well-being of families, and I can't not address that at any great length because I think I'm wandering off here, but the fact of the matter is that unless those things are tackled, I think we're going to be... Look, I'm less concerned about the stolen generations of the past than about the generations we are losing today and tomorrow and next year. We can't, in a sense, change the past, but we have a direct moral responsibility to stop the rot and to do something. Now, what should we be doing and what should governments be doing? Well, I want to invite all of you to go into the website and look at 2 major documents, if you've got the interest and the time. The first is the Closing the Gap Agreement of 2020. Now, the Closing Gap Agreement is interesting. I bought a facsimile of the people who signed it. It's really fascinating because every head of government in Australia, starting with Scott Morrison, signed this document. And the local government association signed it, the heads of government of this territory signed it. And this agreement is what they say we should do to close the gap. And I think it's a really good document. And it's a document that was really promoted by someone called Pat Turner, who I think is one of the finest Aboriginal leaders in this country. Recovering from cancer at the moment, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I saw her the other day and I think she is recovering okay. But she's the one who got in to see Scott Morrison in 2017. She's the one who said to the Prime Minister, it isn't working, Prime Minister. She's the one who said, you've got to do it differently. And I hate to give credit to Scott Morrison, but he's the one who said, oh, I better listen to this. And he got the department in and he said, no, we're not doing it right. And it was that intervention by Scott Morrison. This is the only good thing I can think of to say about Scott Morrison. But I reckon, forget his religion, I reckon this will get him into heaven. He listened to Pat Turner and he led the governments of Australia into this new agreement. And I want to quote some of this agreement because it reflects what my long experience of dealing with these issues, it reflects the reality as I see it. So I'm going to give you a number of quotes. This agreement arises from a commitment from all Australian governments and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander representatives to a fundamentally new way of developing and implementing programs and policies that impact on the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Yep, tick. This agreement stems from the belief that when Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have a genuine say in the design and delivery of services that affect them, better life outcomes are achieved. And this is a really important sentence. It recognised that structural change in the way governments work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is needed to close the gap. It goes on to say, in response, all Australian governments are now sharing decision-making with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, representing their community-controlled peak organisations, and so on. This is an unprecedented shift in the way governments work by encompassing shared decision-making on design, implementation, monitoring and evaluation of policies. I really suggest if you're a reasonably good speed reader, go in and have a look at this because it says so many good things. This agreement's a living document. There will be shared decision-making. There will be improved mainstream institutions. Government will change. It's all here. Parties will listen to the voices and aspirations of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and change the way we work in response. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been saying for a long time they need a much greater say. Community-controlled organisations deliver best. Government agencies need to address systemic daily racism and promote cultural safety, transfer power and resources. Parties acknowledge that strong Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures are fundamental to improved life outcomes. I could read, this is a very long document and I don't have time to read it, but I do commend you glancing through it because it reflects what every head of government was prepared to sign up to. And I say, good on you, chaps. That's fantastic. The sad thing is, and this is an interesting illustration of the problems we all face, is that there's a continuing changing face of everything we deal with. Every one of those heads of government's gone. I mean, it's quite funny. You know, I think bar and the ACT. But the relevance of that is how often have I gone to Aboriginal communities where a different public servant turns up each time? And they ask to tell the same story and they say, but we had someone here before and they wrote it down. Haven't you got that story? And I noticed some nodding in the audience. It's good. Some of you are just nodding off, I understand. But those of you who are nodding in agreement, I'd say thank you very much. But that's as it should be. And I can tell you as someone who works with communities, that is not as it is. And I'd have to say I do occasionally get access to people in authority, and I've seen the federal minister, for example, and I've said, that's not what it's like. And she said, oh, I agree. And I said, the head of the government in Western Australia? Yes, I agree. Well, this is where I start swearing, actually, but I better not because it's on video. I mean, sorry, if they agree, why don't they fix it? That's my point. Now, you might say, well, look, this got this loopy old ex-politician who's saying this, it doesn't work. But fortunately, I've got some supportive material. The previous member for this seat, actually, Josh Frydenberg, as minister, sent this agreement off to the Productivity Commission. Now, the Productivity Commission is not exactly full of bleeding hearts. Although, to be honest, they did appoint a couple of pretty near bleeding hearts to this job. But the Productivity Commission has reported, and the Productivity Commission report is the second thing I'm suggesting you go and have a quick look at. It's the Productivity Commission report on closing the gap agreement, and it's in 2024, so it's this year, right up to date. And again, all I can say is that report reflects reality as I experience it. And it is scathing of the gap between what governments say they will do and what they actually do. Now, this is not a new problem. I mean, you've been told I was Senior Australian of the Year 10 years ago. I must have been really old then. But I was given 90 seconds to speak in the presence of the then Prime Minister. And I remember what I said to him. I said, would you please stop doing things to Aboriginal people and do things with Aboriginal people? That was my message. It's been my message for a long time. It's what I believe to be true. And it's what every head of the government has agreed is true. Now, this is what the Productivity Commission says about the report, and I can only briefly quote from it. It's quite voluminous, but let me... bit of it. The Productivity Commission's first review of the agreement shows that governments are not adequately delivering on the commitment. Despite some pockets of good practice, progress in implementing the agreement's priority reforms for the most part been weak, and reflects tweaks into or actions overlaid onto business as usual approaches. The disparate actions and ad hoc changes have not led to improvements that are noticeable and are meaningful for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. This raises questions about whether governments have fully grasped the scale of change required to their systems, operations and ways of working to deliver the unprecedented shift they've committed to. The Commission's overarching finding is there's been no systemic approach to determining, I want to weep, this is so bad, what changes are needed to be implemented to disrupt business as usual of governments. I mean, this is why we're not closing the gap. Because, and this is, I refer to my lived example of renegotiating the CDP with the Nunanjara Council. This is sort of typical of why my heart lies with the remote communities. With respect to those of you who are not from those remote communities, it's because they are the worst put upon people in the country, the worst Aboriginal people most put upon, most cruelly and inhumanely treated. How long have I been going?
No rush.
Well, let me give you a quick summary. The people in the Nunanjara lands who were completely in a shambles when I first met them in 1979 did the most amazing rebuilding effort in the days when the Commonwealth Government believed it had some responsibilities for remote Australia. At the moment, no government, including the present government, seems to think it has that responsibility. Outside the Northern Territory, the Commonwealth governments of all stripes have vacated the field, basically. They still have some programs, but they've vacated the responsibility of leadership and making sure that things work. Under CDP, which was an employment program, the people on the lands worked out an amazing system of getting by, really. But they voluntarily entered into income management, so there were no arrears of rent, no arrears for power. There was provision for old people, there was provision for law business, there was provision for retirement even. It was all done, it was sort of work for the dole plus. But because it was done in a way which gave Aboriginal people real authority to shape it, these communities established a quite settled, working system. The geniuses in Canberra, and I think they were liberal geniuses, but they were geniuses certainly by their own account, said, hang on, we've got to have equality here. We're going to apply the normal job search requirements. And so instead of CDP, they set up RJCP. That was the next acronym. And RJCP, involving the lands, and this is, as I say, an area not quite as big as Victoria, but pretty big, 8 communities, a couple of thousand people. They were subjected to having these job search providers, not one of which, they appointed 3, not one of them had an office in the lands, any experience in the lands, any contact with the lands. It was a complete farce. And I took that message to Canberra and along to, explaining this is just ridiculous. Look, I'm a foot soldier in this, not a player. I'm just there, engaged. But the fact of the matter is that system collapsed under its own weight. It just collapsed under the weight of failure. So that was replaced with CDP. It couldn't be called CDP because CDP had been abolished, so you couldn't have CDEP, it had to be CDP. And that has been another total failure. And so this government, present government, which is a bit, has, I'm not denying their good hearts, this government says we want to have a better approach. And in the same speech as the Prime Minister made that I quoted about them closing the gap and sharing power and everything, says, today I announce the creation, this is the Prime Minister, our Remote Jobs and Economic Development Program. This is a better approach. It will fund a community organisation to create 3,000 jobs in remote areas, real jobs with proper wages and decent conditions, jobs developed in partnership with the Indigenous communities, jobs that build skills the communities want, jobs that deliver services communities want, jobs that deliver infrastructure, jobs will create a sense of possibility. Now, if I'm hamming that up a bit, it's because I think that's fine. But how do you do it? It's quite hard to do when you're out there in the bush and there's no economic infrastructure. You've got to work, you have to work with the Aboriginal people. So they've put together a program which is a bottom-up program about how this will work. And I think we're going to get pretty close to what we want, they want. But the process is just so unbelievably bureaucratic. And is this because we're dealing with bad people? No, of course we're not. No, they're not bad people. It's because the system in which they operate is so totally unsuited for operating like a partner. It's structured to operate as a boss. And public servants aren't given money to go out and be a good partner. They're given money, in this case, the Prime Minister said, 3,000 jobs. So you've got to go out there and you've got to do this to fit in with what the government's announcement is. And we need to do it our way. We need to take people whose cultural situation, and they're deep in their traditional culture, there's no relation to all these things that we take as normal and as jobs. It's a building job. It's a creating difference job. It's a growth job. It's a job of taking people along, and it's a job where neither the government nor us, the people, and I'm sorry to transpose myself as us, the people, but I try to speak for them, we don't really know for sure how to do it. It's going to be learning on the job. It's going to be an iterative process, a process where you learn by doing, a process where you do things, you measure them. If they're wrong, you do something different. It requires partnership, exactly what these heads of government said is needed. It requires signing up to an objective, a sharing of resources, and quite importantly, and this is the other side of the ledger, the ideal of a partnership, and I've said this to the agency, you can hold us accountable for our share of the partnership. This is what we've said we will do. We have to be accountable for what we say we will do. But please accept that doing it is going to be very, very difficult. I probably use more colourful language than that, but it is going to be very, very difficult. And we will make mistakes, but we're going to make this together. That's what would work in those communities. And that's what I thought governments had signed up to. But what I think I can say, and I don't want to verbal ministers and chief and premiers, what I can say is that in conversations with people who are in a position of authority is that they understand how ridiculously bureaucratic this is, but they're not prioritising the changes within government that are needed to do this differently. And if I get emotional sometimes, it's because I feel quite ashamed, actually, at the way we've treated remote communities in Australia. Quite ashamed. We've adopted punitive approaches. In the Northern Territory, we abolished the local councils, we, the Northern Territory government in this case, set in place regional councils. We took the authority and decision-making away from local communities, and we took their assets as well. Within a year of that, we had the brilliant Howard Brough-led intervention, which denied Aboriginal agency and which has made everything worse. The successive Labor government, in its stronger communities, in my view, did very little to improve things. In fact, I can tell you my response to the Stronger Communities legislation when it was shown to me by the Minister's office, I shocked her advisor by saying, I think this legislation is Stalinist because it permits endless interference by bureaucrats in the lives of the people, and it contains supposedly ameliorative elements which you have no capacity to deliver. And so the imposition of universal income management including across people who are managing their incomes quite properly, was just part of this contempt for Aboriginal agency. Well, some people in this audience might disagree. I think Aboriginal people are the only architects of their own better futures. I'm coloured a little bit by the late Charles Perkins, who I remember saying, when you get out of bed in the morning, go into the bathroom, look in the mirror, and you're looking at the only person who can help you. Charles could be quite robust. But when you think about it, if you want to close the gaps, if you want Aboriginal people to have a full education so they can live comfortably in two cultures, which inevitably they have to do, live in two cultures. If you want people to be healthy, if you want them to be employed, none of this can happen against their will. They have to be the active collaborators and participants. But Commonwealth policy under successive governments has been to infantilise Aboriginal people, to deny them agency, and to deal with things in a punitive rather than a supportive way. The other thing that I'd say about government is that you cannot solve wicked problems by partial interventions. You can only solve wicked problems, that is complex social problems, by working locally in a place, dealing with issues in the order in which they arise. At the moment, for example, in Warburton, we have a problem of civil order. We've got a small group of kids who are creating a lot of problems, interfering with the delivery of medical services and other things. You can't fix the other problems until you fix the problem of civil order. As always, Noel Pearson has said everything worth saying at some stage in his long career, and he made the point that the order in which you do things matters. You've got to do things in the right order in a place to achieve change. And we're so far from that's when I get pretty unhappy. Now, what I don't want is to suck all the air out of this room. I think things are getting better. And I think we have a government which is basically quite good-hearted. I think it is beset by other problems, and this remains, in a sense, a fourth-order problem. What I think the importance of the reconciliation movement is to continually be there to urge not only ourselves, but governments too, to live up to the mark. I think we should all be demanding that governments behave as they said they would behave in the agreement in 2020. It's a very good agreement. They put their names to it. They should do it. We as citizens should insist they do it. Thank you.
It's truly wonderful. Thank you so much, Fred, for your generosity, your commitment for all of your life, your resilience, your enthusiasm, and being able to bounce back.
Cut the compliments, I'll fall over.
But no, we're very grateful, Fred. Thank you so much. We have 5 or 10 minutes for questions. We have a microphone that Simone has, and there's one just here on the left-hand side. If you could please just say your name and then ask your question, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Howard from the Whitehorse Friends for Reconciliation. In 2019, the 8 reconciliation groups in the eastern suburbs, in true partnership with the Mulla Indigenous Gathering Place, put on a forum, Aboriginal Culture and Our Future, and the premise of the forum was that the world's in deep trouble. I could put it less politely than that, and we've got to put our heads in a different space for thinking about the future. So we workshopped 6 ideas for Aboriginal culture. We must look after each other, just take what you need, trying to understand connection to country, caring for country, and 3 others. My question is, because this changes the conversation completely from not from how can we help you to we think we're in trouble and we think you can help us. My question is, do you think this is just pie in the sky thinking. It's an inappropriate time to introduce ideas like this when you've got gaps and treaties and truth-telling and stuff like that. But I think we're running out of time.
Angela told me to get out of politics a long time ago. She said, your answers to questions are too long. And she was right. I could give a very long answer to that question, but I think the short point that I would want to make is that all the things you're talking about are important, and I think wherever we can establish respectful relationships and partnerships, that is a plus and will advance things. But I think the other side of the coin is that there is no escaping the importance of Aboriginal effort. And I think that the danger that we supporters, if I can call us that, the danger that we pose is that we can create an impression that things will be fixed by our sympathy and our symbolic support. That has no content in my view. The only thing that changes things is people's behaviour. People's behaviour is changed by their sense of security, their motivation, their sense they've got support, and that's where I think the sort of activities you're talking about are so important. But I think that and this is a perspective which is coloured by the fact that I'm dealing on the ground with particular problems at the moment, and so I'm a bit transfixed by the answers that I think are relevant to them. But I think I'm becoming more suspicious of anything that reeks of symbolic as against real commitment to change. I think it has to be an engagement, and I think there was a lot of this in the Vice-Chancellor's comments, I think. What are we offering that really does make a difference? And sympathy doesn't make a difference unless the sympathy enables people. I may have missed your point, but that's my response.
One at the back there. Yep, Shelley Cable.
Thank you very much.
The poster child.
Shelley Cable, very proud Noongar, and thank you so much for your shout out to our incredible Noongar leaders and their work with WA government. You've spoken a lot this evening, Fred, about the role of government and what citizens should be demanding of our government. But I'm conscious that we're here at a university and a lot of us don't work for government, we might work in the private sector. And I was really keen to hear your views on what is the role of the private sector and of industry in reconciliation.
Well, it's huge. I didn't talk about the role of the university because I thought that was canvassed in an excellent way by the Vice-Chancellor. And why would I teach my grandmother to suck eggs? Very youthful grandmother too, which is very nice.
I'm just thinking 20 years.
But Shelley, I think each has a part to play. And so, the mining industry has a big part to play. The finance industry have a part to play. I assume you're part of playing that part now. What I look for at a RAP is whether that organisation is saying, we understand what our role in this is and what difference we can make. Now, to take a specific example, there's a fantastic woman called, I never remember any names, but she had a very unusual name, wasn't it? She's my memory now, by the way. It's Topaz. Topaz McAuliffe, I think. Now, Topaz, you might know Topaz. Topaz was in Queensland and she was working with Coles. Now, Coles went from a standing start to having 3,000 Aboriginal employees. Now, I think that matters. It matters because Aboriginal people go to the shops and see Aboriginal people behind the counter. It matters that employment matters of itself, and she transformed that culture. I think with some assistance, people like my niece Kate, who was with the West Farmers, but I give her great credit, Topaz. I think she was the driver. So I think each section, you look at what's our job, what's our role in society, and what therefore is our appropriate contribution. And I mean, really reconciliation action plans came as a bit of a response to Aboriginal complaints about the decade of reconciliation. You know, during the decade of reconciliation, we were very good at statements of reconciliation, which we put up on the wall. And often I heard Aboriginal people say, well, it's very nice to have it on the wall, but when are things going to be different? And I think, in what way can I make a difference? Now, I thought that, I mean, I love, I can't think of his name now, the Rio Tinto man.
Sam Walsh.
No, not Sam. Leon Davis. Thanks, darling. I couldn't remember her name for a year after I fell in love with her, so it just shows you how bad I am with names. But Leon Davis turned the mining industry. He made a speech in 1995 where he said, we've all opposed native title, we've opposed everything. No, it doesn't work. We've got to work with native title. And that led to a transformation. And it's very imperfect. And Rio Tinto's been in the naughty boy corner because of Dugan Gorge. The wholesale destruction of sites in the it's been going on endlessly in the Pilbara as part of the mining industry. That's gone on. But there's a code of behaviour and conduct and reward and, you know, that is pretty workable. That was an example of an industry saying, what's our role here? And the good thing is that, for example, Polly Farmer, who I mentioned, we went along to Rio Tinto because we didn't have any money, and they really funded us to get going. And then when I went to BHP, the next town, I remember the head of BHP, Arnold, said to me, well, I suppose we'll have to support you. We've got to be as good as the neighbour. There's a rolling sort of thing. So where you are, and you know, take some advice from this chap. He was in the finance area in a number of capacities. You know, that's an important role. We've got a real problem at the moment. I'm probably about out of school here, directly in the finance area. The people I work with in the lands are deeply traditional, and their culture is one of satisfying immediate wants. It's a desert culture, a great shortage of resources, and if you find resources, you consume them. If people get money, they consume it. Now, how do you set up a money management thing which is consistent with Aboriginal agency, but which deals with a very real problem of managing money? So I think, and you would know of the abuses in the finance system, where people are selling goods and getting rights to get money out of people's Centrelink accounts on white goods. You would know about the abuses by Telstra of the sale of things. So A, keep your nose clean, and B, work out what is your contribution, what should be your contribution, and C, do it.
Fabulous. We've just got time for one more question, and it's Peter Riddell here in the third row.
Fred, I just want to say thank you for your work that you've done over the years. It's incredible. And as you know, I've had a great privilege of actually meeting you a long time ago when reconciliation was established in Canberra, a long time back then. I've had the great privilege of working in universities. I started off as a motor mechanic. Auntie and uncle convinced me to go to university. My life's been fantastic ever since. I thought I'd be a motor mechanic.
We're much shorter of good mechanics, you know.
I still do a lot of my own work, but no one else can do that. But it gives me so much joy. But I've had a great opportunity to work in 4 universities leading Indigenous strategies and student staff portfolios. And one of the things that I'm perplexed about is the very low completion rates of Indigenous students at university. So in 2017, we changed the funding model. We lobbied for the funding model to change to incentivise universities to try and increase the 47% 9-year completion rate of Indigenous students. So 53% of students who enrol in universities do never complete. And it's not because they don't go on to good things. Some go on to great good jobs and
Is that Aboriginal students?
Aboriginal
Yes,
students.
sorry, thank you.
Aboriginal students. And some go on, because that's for the mainstream, if you like, or the total cohort, it's a 74% completion rate. So you're looking at 74% compared to 47% of Indigenous students completing.
Big gap.
And that's a 9-year completion rate. That's not looking. If you look at 6 and 4 years, it's horrendous. I mean, the 4 years is in the 20s. Not in, how do we, as institutions, as a sector, we know that the funding model, changing the funding model to load the back end of the degree has not worked, because that changed in 2017, and we still can't get our completion rates up.
Look, I think in this area, as in everything, people matter. So getting the right people working with Aboriginal students is critical. I'm a bit in love with St Catherine's College in Western Australia, which I mentioned to you before the meeting. St Catherine's had a retention rate of 90% for Aboriginal students. And they had have a wonderful leader called Fiona Crow, who I would walk over hot coals for. She's terrific. But she got in other people of great quality. So she pinched from Wesley College, which had a very good Aboriginal program, a wonderful young woman whose name I can't think of because I'm not even in love with her actually, but you win some, you lose some. She was part of the mix that got this going so well. I mean, I was very curious about how you do this, and I'm expert in nothing, so I've got a light knowledge of it. But what I found was they were very, very pastoral. They were very big at building all the sort of things in this bloody agreement, actually. Very big about culture, very big about, putting your arms around people, not in a disabling way, but in an enabling way. And also identifying where people were mismatched with their courses. So quite often people would start in this course and they'd say, hang on, that's not working for you. What about this? So there was very good management of the academic progress of people and making sure that there was a good match. As an example, I've got a couple of Aboriginal friends who were actually at Curtin University. Professor, Professor, I'm thinking of the Aboriginal man who was the elder in residence, Forrest. His daughter did law, and his daughter's partner did law. And, they're terrific, and the daughter's graduating law. I met the partner, who's a lovely bloke, and he's given up law and he's teaching, and he's working with students in education. I think maybe part of the trick in a university is to make sure that people find the right niche. Now, this is just a human thing. I mean, look, Aboriginal people, my fundamental belief is I don't give a stuff about whether you're Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal. We're all human, and that's my overriding belief. And we all need love and nurture and care. And for Aboriginal students, that's often not able to be given by the family because they don't have the background and education and all the rest. So having within the university something which provides pastoral care and guidance is, I think, very important. Another thing which might get right up the nose of some of you, I don't think that the primary object of universities should be to turn out Aboriginals, in the sense that I think it's more important, and I take Shelley, who spoke a minute ago, really, just Shelley Cable. I remember Shelley Cable. I don't know why I'm not in love with her either. Could have been once, but not now, Shelley. But the thing about Shelley was she said, we need more accountants. She, a long time ago, she said there are only 6 accountants in Australia. She told me tonight there's 200 now. It's that turning out people across the educational range. I mean, UWA, which is our alma mater, has turned out lots of lawyers and lots of doctors, and that's terrific. I mean, I told you the answers are too long. I was in casualty not very long ago, lying there. Am I dying? No, I'm not dying. And I found myself being cared for by a little Aboriginal doctor. And what's your name? Billy. I said, "Oh, hi, Billy. Well, what's your surname?" Because I'm not allowed to give our surnames. I said, "I want your surname. I know a lot of Aboriginal people. I know a lot of. I want to." "Oh, I'm Billy Kickett." "All right. Well, thanks, Billy." Well, we had a nice chat. We explained why I wanted a name. She went off and came back with another Aboriginal doctor. This was an Adnamatna doctor from South Australia. I said, "Do you think I might be dead and in heaven?" I mean, what more could you ask? If you want to know whether we're making progress, isn't that fantastic? I find myself in the care of 2 Aboriginal doctors. Yes!
That's fabulous. Yeah. Thanks, Fred. Can we please thank Fred Chaney for a wonderful, uplifting address? I'd like to invite Professor John Evans, our Pro-Vice Chancellor for Indigenous Engagement, to have the final word of the evening. Thank you.
Many thanks, Adam. It's a tough gig following Fred and our Vice-Chancellor, Pascal. I will make the observation, it's good to see that there's some hope for Scott Morrison to get to heaven. And I'm sure Josh Frydenberg would agree with that as well.
It won't be by the route you expected.
That's right, yes. I think there's a couple of things, and I haven't got much time, and I know that people are keen to have a drink and something to eat and to talk amongst themselves. But you mentioned 2 things that resonated with me early, and you said about culture of change, and we haven't seen that in our politics, and also about jobs. And I think one of the great things that Swinburne is about, we say people and technology for a better future. I think we're positioning ourselves now to be an agent for change in the future. And I think your presentation tonight helps us move in that direction. So thank you very much.
Finally, thank you so much to everybody for spending this significant time commitment tonight. Thank you for supporting Swinburne's reconciliation actions and journey. Particularly thanks you to Uncle Colin Hunter, who welcomed us earlier, to our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Pascal Kester, to Fred Chaney, and to all of you for being here. Particularly thanks to Simone Hamlin and a wonderful team, our comms team, who did a great job organising this event. Simone was being contacted regularly. Can I get in? Can I get in? It is one of the, as Pascal said, one of the most oversubscribed events in the university's history. Thank you so much, and thank you for your support. We'll be in touch on opportunities to engage in reconciliation at Swinburne in the future. Thank you and happy trails.